Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Heather Arias. I'm the Transportation and Toxics Division Chief at CARB, and we are going to be talking about targets that require widespread adoption of zero-emission vehicles, current and future regs, and the importance of improving community health. But before we get into the panel discussion, we have a very special guest with us today to provide us some opening remarks, and I'll introduce her. Senator Gonzalez was first elected to the state Senate to represent the 33rd District in a special election in June of 2019, and was later reelected in November 3rd, 2020 general election for her first full four-year term. As state senator for Senate District 33, she represents nearly 1 million residents in Southeast LA, Signal Hill, portions of South LA, and her hometown of Long Beach. She currently is a member of the Special Committee on Pandemic Emergency Response, Energy, Utilities, and Communications, Environmental Quality, and Judiciary and Health Committees. In addition, she was recently appointed as the new chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, becoming the first Latina or Latino to ever serve in this capacity and the only woman to serve in this for the last 20 years. Senator Gonzalez, we're honored to have you today, and I turn this over to you for any of your opening remarks.
Thank you, Heather, and good morning, everyone. Hi, as she mentioned, I'm Senator Lena Gonzalez, proudly representing the Senate District 33, which of course includes my hometown of Long Beach and Southeast Los Angeles and a portion of South LA. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all today to discuss the future of zero-emission drayage trucks with the Port of Long Beach in my district, as many of you know. And as the new chair of transportation, I am very excited to kick off Project 800 and see many of your ambitions and goals and work up ahead with me as we move along this legislative process. The new Project 800 initiative, as you know, aims to support the deployment of zero-emission trucks serving California ports by setting a goal of 800 zero-emission drayage trucks orders by 2021. And if you're like me, I just realized that it's 2021 now, coming off of the year that we just came off of. So we have a lot of work to do. My district, as many of you know, of course, includes the Port of Long Beach, which has been a global leader for environmental ports, along with our twin port, Los Angeles. And it has taken some incredible measures to reduce diesel particulate matter from drayage trucks at the port. Implementing zero-emission technology where feasible is critical to achieving our state's climate goals and to protecting vulnerable communities impacted by air pollution, many of who I represent along the 710 communities who suffer from asthma and many other life-altering health conditions. And as policy leaders, we need to ensure and continue that develop action and policies that make sense and make zero-emission trucks feasible for large and small-scale fleets, especially for small business owners. Incentive programs have been critical in the development and deployment of zero-emission vehicles, but we need to do more. That means fueling stations and infrastructure, but also an assessment of the safety of alternative fuel trucks, the impacts on surrounding communities, and many, many other factors. I also hope that every other port in California can follow suit with confidence that California policies and investment will support them as well. And we can expand on portfolios of incentives while engaging stakeholders on new technologies and regulations on the horizon. I want to thank you again for inviting me today. I look forward to being your partner in the Senate, and please contact our office if there are any questions or ideas that you have, but I just really look forward to all of your thought leadership and becoming a great partner with you in the state of California to create better air quality for all, but also better opportunities for all of our truck drivers as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We really appreciate your time today, and we know you're super busy, and we do appreciate it, and we appreciate the sentiments and absolutely look forward to partnering with you as we all move forward. So before we get into any of the questions that we've received from our registrants, I'd like to give each of the panelists a few moments to introduce themselves. We are joined by a great group of folks that I've worked with over the years and will continue to work with. And we will go in alphabetical order just to make it easy. Michael, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Michael Benjamin, and I'm Chief of the Air Quality Planning and Science Division at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. In this capacity, I'm responsible for coordinating development of California's clean air plans, and I work very closely with the 35 local air districts in California. Several of their representatives are on the panel with me today. I also work very closely with other partners, including the United States Environmental Protection Agency and a broad range of industry, non-governmental, and public stakeholders. So I'm very pleased to be on the panel and look forward to a good discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Chris?
Yes, my name's Chris Chavez. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for Coalition for Clean Air, which is an advocacy nonprofit based in downtown LA and also does advocacy up at the Capitol. My specific role is to head up the Southern California advocacy strategy to the South Coast Air Quality Management District, to the California Resources Board, local and state governments, as well as participating in being part of the AB 617 process in the area. So we will do a lot of work in the transportation, electrification, and cleaning up the goods movement sector.
Thank you, Chris. Tyson?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tyson Eckerly. I'm the Deputy Director for Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development at GoBiz, the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And my role is really to help problem solve and build the market out, really creating opportunities and connections and bringing people together to make it all work. So very excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tyson. Henry?
Morning, everybody. I'm Henry Hilkin. I'm the Director of Planning and Climate Protection at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. We are the regional air district for the San Francisco Bay Area. Among my responsibilities, I oversee the team that prepares our regional clean air plans and local air plans under AB 617. And I also supervise our climate team, or which is sort of central, the focal point of a lot of the air district's climate protection activities as well. Happy to be here today.
Thank you, Henry. Matt?
Hey, Heather, just a point of clarification. Is this opening remarks or just intros?
Just our intros and any short remarks before we get into questions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I'm Matt Miyasato, the Deputy Executive Officer for Science and Technology Advancement at the South Coast Air Quality Management District. And that's just a long way of saying I'm the Chief Technology Guy at the nation's largest air district. I just want to say we're super excited to be on or part of the panel for Project 800. Folks probably know that the South Coast AQMD, we unfortunately suffer from the worst air quality in the nation, highest ozone levels, second highest particulate matter. And the biggest source of pollution is mobile sources, for which we don't have a lot of regulatory control. So we're really aggressively pursuing advanced technologies like zero emission trucks and been great partners with the California Air Resources Board. So thanks to Heather and her team for partnering with us to develop cleaner technologies. You heard from Don Fenton at Volvo. We've been working with them, also Daimler Trucks. But I just want to just quickly put things in perspective. 800 trucks as part of Project 800. We are super optimistic we'll be able to do that shortly. But to put it in perspective, we need to turn over 200,000 trucks in the South Coast Basin in a short amount of time. And so we believe that you need to have the accelerated incentive programs now. And I think the senator mentioned that. So replacing older diesel trucks with the cleaner technologies that are available now while we work on zero emission technologies and the infrastructure. And we believe that we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can do both. And I think with all the help of the folks on this panel, we can help achieve clean air. So anxious to hear about the questions coming up from the panel. So thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Matt. And last but certainly not least, Heather.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I'm Heather Tomley. I'm the Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs for the Port of Long Beach. And in that capacity, I'm responsible for overseeing all of the planning functions for the port. And I supervise the environmental planning group, the transportation planning group, and the master planning group that's responsible for how we use our land long term. In the time that I've been with the port over the last 15 years, I've been directly involved with the development of our Clean Air Action Plan in partnership with the Port of Los Angeles. and also have developed strong relationships with South Coast Air Quality Management District, California Air Resources Board, and EPA as we've moved forward with different strategies and programs to reduce air quality or reduce air emissions and improve air quality related to port-related operations. We've been very successful over the last 15 years in being able to implement strong programs that have had a meaningful effect. And we're looking to continue to improve on that and move forward as we work towards achieving our zero emission goals for terminal equipment and for on-road trucks. So I look forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Heather. And a little bit more background of myself. As I mentioned, I'm Heather Arias, Transportation and Toxics Division Chief at CARB. And in my division, we work on all of the different efforts to transition the freight fleet over to cleaner vehicles, and including our more recent efforts of pushing towards the zero emission technologies, recent adoption of the at-birth rule, and promulgation of dredge truck rule, transportation refrigeration units, etc. So it is my team that is working on the regulation that we have been talking a little bit about. We're certainly very interested in Project 800 and helping to further the deployment of the zero emission that we all need in order to meet all of our goals. So that's actually a perfect segue to one of the questions that was asked that I'd like to start with. And maybe, Michael, you can kick off this one. What are the drivers and goals that are pushing the state to both require and fund all these zero emission vehicles?
Sure, thanks, Heather. Well, the state of California is responsible for ensuring that all of the areas that are not in attainment with the federal air quality standards do come into attainment through the development and adoption of what are called state implementation plans, or SIPs. And we also have a very ambitious range of climate goals that have been adopted and mandated by both the legislature and the governor. And so over the next 30 years, we're going to be working extremely hard in partnership with the local air districts, as well as with industry and other stakeholders, to meet these mandated goals. So as I mentioned, we have various state implementation plans that are in development with attainment years for both South Coast and the San Joaquin Valley, which are the two areas in California with the most challenging ozone and fine particulate air quality issues. Timing-wise, we have near-term targets for our state implementation plans in 2023, 2024, and 2025 for meeting the 80 parts per billion ozone standards, as well as the fine particulate standards, or PM 2.5 standards. And then targets in 2031 and 2037 for the tighter ozone standards of 75 ppb, or parts per billion, and 70 ppb. So we have some very near-term goals or targets that we need to hit, and then some longer-term targets for our state implementation plans. At the same time, there's also an immediate need to reduce emissions and exposure in the state's highly impacted low-income and underserved communities, including in areas around the ports of LA and Long Beach in Southern California. And then finally, we have various climate goals that I mentioned that include midterm targets in 2030 for a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels, and longer term targets in 2045 for carbon neutrality. So we have these three areas that we're working on developing holistic strategies for. And to do that, we're in the process of developing several key planning documents, which include an updated mobile source strategy and a 2022 statewide state implementation plan strategy. And these documents will serve as policy roadmaps for CARB for the next 5 to 10 years. Both of these documents will emphasize that meeting our combined climate, air quality, and community emission reduction goals will require a major transition to zero emission technology in every mobile source sector over the next 30 years. So we recognize that transitioning to zero emission will require a combination of not just regulations to encourage technology development, but also incentives to accelerate technology adoption.
Thanks, Michael. And a little bit more from our Air District partners on this. When you think about the state pushing, and then certainly there's a lot at the local level that you're also trying to balance. So in your opinion, Henry and Matt, can you talk a little bit about why this push needs to happen now rather than when the technology is much more mature?
Henry, do you want to go?
Sure. I'll start off. Yeah, well, it's critically important, and for the reasons that Matt laid out in his introduction. Transportation is the major source of air pollutant and greenhouse gases in our region, and as Matt pointed out, we have virtually no regulatory authority over transportation sources. That's done at the state level. So incentives and policies and other programs at the local level that we can support really are critical. So in our regional clean air plan, it's not a SIP, as Michael laid out. Our clean air plan is for the state air quality standards. A couple of years ago, we laid out a number of objectives that this Project 800 is really going to be critical in supporting. We laid out a goal of attaining all of our health-based ambient air quality standards, included a goal of eliminating disparities in local exposure to fine particulate and air toxics in our most impacted communities. And then lastly, achieving in the Bay Area, aligning with the state's very aggressive climate greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so transportation is by far the largest source of criteria pollutants, air toxics, and greenhouse gases in the Bay Area. And converting over to zero emission technology will be absolutely critical in meeting those air quality goals in our most impacted communities, as well as achieving those climate goals. And so this, the technology is constantly evolving. And, during my career, I have seen just almost every year, you see new technologies coming onto the market. We could have had this conversation 10 years ago and the landscape would have looked vastly different. And so each year, new technology is coming on the market. And one of the things that a program like Project 800 can do in partnership with the local air districts is really sort of turbocharge those efforts, provide a market for those emerging technologies so that companies are prepared to invest in emerging technologies. So we've seen them evolve over the years, and I expect them to continue to evolve, but we cannot wait. The health and climate goals are an immediate imperative. And one of the roles of government is to send those market signals to ensure that the private sector continues to innovate. So this is a key part of that.
Yeah, let me just add, thanks, Henry. That's a good segue. I think to add to what Henry just mentioned, what Michael said is that, we're working closely with ARB, not only on demonstration of new technologies. You just want to give a shout out to their GGRF, Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds, and their ZANZF zero and near zero emission freight facility projects. We were fortunate enough to win those large awards to demonstrate and commercialize zero emission heavy duty drayage trucks, which is extremely important. So to ARB's credit, you've seen that it takes a large investment to get these large trucking manufacturers to invest in development of the technologies. We heard Don Fenton on the previous panel say, they needed that type of investment and the ongoing incentives. So something that Michael mentioned that's extremely important, we need to incentivize the accelerated fleet turnover to get, well, at least our district, into attainment with the federal standards, which are being held protective. So it's important to push the technology forward now, because if we want to do a wholesale transition in the out years, we've got to lay the groundwork now with technology, infrastructure, but more importantly, getting the OEMs involved, have the supply chain there, have the service and dealerships available and ready to support those types of technologies. In the interim, to get to clean air, we think, as Michael mentioned, incentives are going to be extremely important for cleaner technologies that are available today, reducing diesel particulate. And we think, as I'd mentioned in my opening remarks, you could do both. Incentivize now cleaner truck technology with near zero natural gas as we prepare for zero emission technologies in the future. but we agree, Heather, you got to start now. You got to do it today.
Yeah, thanks. And Chris, I wanted to also get your perspective on this, certainly as EJ Group and as well as your own personal experience of living in Long Beach and being a steering committee member on the 617 community. What is your opinion and thoughts on why push now on this technology?
Sure. I think one of the most important things, and to echo what the other panelists have said, is there is a phrase in the political world, it's the urgency of now. It's vitally important that we start acting as soon as possible, immediately, to reduce emissions in this area. So, for example, in the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach AB 617 community, which I'm a part of the community steering committee for, the amount of exposure to diesel particulate matter is very high. And that, according to CARB, diesel particulate matter is carcinogenic. It's comprised of over 40 different carcinogenic chemicals. The total air cancer risk, so South Coast AQMD puts out a study called the Multiple Air Toxic Exposure Study, or MATES. And throughout the South Coast Basin, 3/4 of the air toxic cancer risk in this region is from diesel particulate matter. And that is even higher in communities like mine, like Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach, because of our proximity to goods movement corridors. So already, these communities have long been impacted by different environmental injustices that have predated, certainly many of the more recent efforts. So really, we're playing catch up in trying to right some of these longstanding injustices. I'd also agree with what Michael from CARB said, is that there are other factors too that are really pushing this forward. The commitments under AB and SB 32, the requirements to meet the ambient air quality standards that are coming up. South Coast is coming up to the deadline for 2023, and it's going to be very tough to meet those goals. And that's something that's a commitment, not just to the people of California, the people of the South Coast Air Basin, but also it's a commitment to the federal government. And under this new administration, we may see a greater receptiveness towards interventions, towards efforts to actually really make sure we meet those requirements. And that's just the first deadline. There are a whole host of deadlines after that. And then also what's important to remember is that California has committed to deploying a certain amount of electric vehicles by certain deadlines due to the Charge Ahead California initiative, which was first started in 2014, SB 1275. That bill committed to put out 1 million electric vehicles by 2023. Subsequent legislations have 1.5 million electric vehicles by 2025. And then there was, of course, Governor Brown's executive order in 2018, if I'm remembering correctly, of 5 million by 2030. So you have all these different facets in play, all these different requirements, commitments coming in play. But when it comes down to it, for the people who live in the communities, it is ultimately the best thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
Thank you all. And, you guys have all laid out all of the great reasons why, everything from the very local exposure to the regional and the climate. And as Hector mentioned earlier in his opening comments, these are all the reasons that we have articulated that zero is the end game. And we've had many stakeholders in the freight industry rightfully ask us, what is the end game so we don't have to keep turning over? And as Hector said this morning, zero is it. If we can get to zero, then we don't have to keep coming back to industry. And as Chris mentioned, the governor has really pushed us on that effort and asked us to truly try to see if we can get the 100% zero emission drayage truck fleet by 2035. And my staff has put out some draft language on that. We're starting to talk with stakeholders, But as the conversation's been going throughout the day, there are going to be a lot of challenges with meeting the deployment of that. And Tyson, I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that GoBiz is doing. And one of the questions that we got was, who will coordinate between the large number of stakeholders in order to successfully deploy EV technology on California's highways, and how would that be accomplished? And you guys are doing a lot of great work in that, and maybe you can help talk about that and help articulate how we're really going to get to this 2035 target.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Heather. And yes, I think there's really, if there's one word that comes to mind, it's teamwork. It takes all parties to make this happen. Everybody who's on this panel, everybody who's in the audience, it's from the stakeholders who are, experiencing the impacts of bad air quality all the way up to the governor's office. And the governor's ultimately, fully committed to making this happen. And you saw it in his budget proposal, which has big investments going into infrastructure. It's really centered around equity and getting the market to scale. We're really giving a lot of thought about how do we unlock private capital into this market, because getting to scale, incentives are great and absolutely necessary, but to get to that 200,000 truck fleet turnover that Matt mentioned, you really have to have private capital animated. And so we're looking at ways to help bridge that gap. But I think structurally, as part of that executive order that Governor Newsom signed in September, he tasked GoBiz to work with basically everybody, all the state agency partners and stakeholders, to develop a zero emission vehicle market development strategy. And that's due out by the end of this month. We're really excited about it. We're trying to use it as a structural frame to help get everybody on the same page in terms of thought and process. So it's organized around 4 pillars, which so it's vehicles, infrastructure, the end user, and workforce. And so really with those 4 pillars all have to be in relative balance to make this market work. If you're losing focus on any of those, it slows things down. And so all the actions and objectives that are in that plan tie back to those pillars, and it's built on a foundation of core principles. And I won't go through all, we have 5 core principles, but the one that's, we're really driving home is putting equity into every decision, right? And so that's really about focusing our resources in areas that need it most, and the priority populations that have been impacted the most by air quality and impacts related to this industry. So so when that comes out, that's the start, right? It's very much an iterative process, one that we're going to be continually engaging with stakeholders to try to make sure that we're pulling the right parties together, making connections. At GoBiz, we always going to talk about, we want to be not a funnel for information, but an amplifier of information. So it doesn't have to all run through us, but it's an ecosystem we're trying to create, and it's just really creating opportunity. And so that the strategy is kind of foundationally a coordination document, but then we're going to put a lot of focus on implementation and driving down kind of into the core tactics of what we do to actually make this thing happen. So as permitting, for example, or interconnection, or the stuff that really matters on the ground to make these projects work. And that's where our commitment is.
Thanks, Tyson. And one of the really important things that you mentioned is partnership. And everybody on this panel certainly is working towards this goal, including the ports. So I kind of wanted to spend a little time with Heather now and ask about, what are the major seaports doing to not only develop the local charging infrastructure, but also to support the rollout of the zero emission vehicles. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, our current focus at the ports has really been on the demonstration of the zero emission trucks in drayage operations. We've been participating in a lot of different grant funded projects, thanks to the assistance of the state and CARB and CEC in particular, with funding that's been made available. That's been critical to be able to move forward with these demonstration projects. We also, through the state ZANZEF grant, I think Matt mentioned the ZANZEF grant earlier, both Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles are developing projects with the assistance of ZANZEF grants, and those include on-road zero-emission truck components. And we're working in partnership with other ports around the state on those projects as well. On the Long Beach project, we have a partnership with Port of Oakland and Port of Stockton, and on the Los Angeles side, they're partnering with Port of Hueneme. So we are looking to broaden participation by multiple ports in those projects as we move forward. We're also hoping to be successful in securing an upcoming grant for a large-scale operational demonstration. I think that's going to be a critical phase going forward to really understand how these trucks can be successfully deployed in drayage service. It goes beyond the individual, can the truck technology perform on an individual basis, and really understanding operationally what does it mean to deploy a large number of these trucks at the same time, and what are the operational considerations that need to be understood and addressed going forward. So a lot of our focus currently has been on those demonstrations. At the same time, we are focused on looking into the infrastructure side to support these trucks as they get deployed. Arguably, the infrastructure is going to be the bigger challenge going forward. And we are looking at opportunities to charge in the ports, but those opportunities are going to be limited. We don't have a lot of available land for this, and operations aren't set up for extended parking operations. But we do think that the ports could provide some opportunity charging. And so we're looking right now, the Port of Long Beach is conducting a fueling and charging siting study, looking at available parcels throughout the port and areas immediately adjacent to the port to identify where there might be candidate sites where we could move forward with the infrastructure to support zero emission operations. But we need to make sure that we're looking at the long-term availability of that land, traffic and circulation issues, other competing land needs, and other factors. But I do think that that will be an important piece to really understand where those opportunities might be in the port area to support the larger conversation and the regional discussions that we need to have to build out throughout the area. We've also been in coordination with Southern California Edison through their Heavy Duty Charge Ready program. That's been a really critical piece in moving forward with the projects that we've done already. And I think will continue to play a really important role in helping to fund the infrastructure for charging facilities in the area. But like I mentioned, the zero emission infrastructure really needs to be addressed regionally, looking at distributed public fueling and charging stations, availability of infrastructure at trucking facilities, warehouses, and distribution centers. Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, is currently conducting a study where they're hoping to gain a better understanding of the regional infrastructure needs to support zero emission trucking, and we've been participating in the scoping of that study, and I think that will be an important piece for us to coordinate regionally on meeting those needs. But we need to be building the infrastructure now. 2035 may sound like it's a far way off, but if you really break it down into what needs to happen and when, we need to be putting these projects in place now. Many of these projects could take years before they come to fruition, and to be able to support the timelines that we're talking about for implementation of these trucks, we need the infrastructure projects to be moving forward now to support that. So some of the other things that we're looking forward with, we do have our port programs and policies. The two ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach are committed to our Clean Air Action Plan goals and our Clean Truck Program strategy that was included in there, and included several different milestones to ultimately get us to our zero emission goal of 2035 for drayage truck operations. I think that there are opportunities along the way to help us get there. One of the major things that we're hoping to be able to move forward with soon is our Clean Truck Fund rate, where we charge on for the movement of loaded containers through the gates and provide exemptions for zero emission trucks. And the funds that are generated through that program would be used to incentivize the purchase of cleanest trucks. We know that that's going to play a critical role to help support ultimately where the state is headed in achieving your goals. We've always seen ourselves as sort of a local facilitator to do our part to help meet the state's goals. And so that's an area where we think that we'll continue to have an important role going forward. So we look forward to continuing to partner with AQMD and CARB as we move forward with implementation.
Thanks, Heather. And you mentioned the regional aspect of it. So let's shift back up to Northern California a little bit. And Henry, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you can share with the group plans that you guys have been working on with the Port of Oakland to address, the truck traffic and zero emission charging and fueling needs around that area.
Sure. So under AB 617, air districts like mine and Matt's are required to work with communities to develop local emission reduction plans to reduce emissions and exposure in our most impacted communities. And so in the Bay Area, we've identified a number of different communities that are identified as 617 communities. The first one in which we developed a plan was in West Oakland. So starting a couple years ago, we partnered with a local community group, the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, who has a long history of community organizing in West Oakland, mainly around environmental, primarily air quality issues. So they were great community partners and really provided a great liaison with the community at large in West Oakland. And so as we were doing the technical work to underpin, to sort of provide the foundation for the plan, we knew this already, but the sort of the detailed modeling that we did really confirmed that it's all about transportation in West Oakland. There aren't many stationary sources that cause the air quality issues in West Oakland. There are a few, but it's mainly port-related activity and activity related to port functions, and then a couple interstates that bisect the community as well. So the West Oakland Community Action Plan really heavily relies upon strategies focusing on mobile sources, not so much the stationary sources that are our bread and butter. And so it identifies a number of strategies for the Port of Oakland specifically and others, but with the port, there are strategies that speak to provide expanding the infrastructure, doing an infrastructure study and coming up with a plan for providing the charging and fueling infrastructure that's needed that Heather was referring to. Unfortunately, not at a regional scale. We don't have a SCAG project like Heather mentioned in LA, but yeah, at the Port of Oakland, there are strategies for, like I said, expanding the fueling and infrastructure, and then just expanding the fleets of zero emission equipment. And so that includes either hydrogen fuel cells or electric vehicles. And there are other strategies also that are very important that support the technology-based strategies. So there are a lot of land use and transportation measures like truck routes, idling limits, enforcing truck routes and idling limits, identifying and assuring truck storage, making sure that there's adequate parking for the trucks and the chassis away from the community. Right now, a lot of that parking and support services are right within the residential community. And so some of our strategies speak to moving the parking and support services over more towards the port, out of the residential areas. So there's really the West Oakland Community Action Plan really relies on a combination of this sort of land use and transportation strategies that are probably more for the responsibility of the city of Oakland, and then more technology-based strategies that speak to the Port of Oakland, but also programs like this from the state as well.
Thanks, Henry. And you mentioned your West Oakland plan, and not only the work that you guys are doing with the port, but also the city and all of your other partners. So I wanted to open it up a little bit to Chris and Matt. If you guys wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other efforts that are happening down in Southern California that are beyond, the regs that CARB's working on and the work that the ports are doing that you guys are also trying to do to move this effort forward with zero emission vehicles.
Sure, I can go ahead and go. I think one of the most important notes in this is that incentives certainly have their place, they have their role, but they are just one tool in the toolbox. And that we've long advocated for stronger regulatory actions from the air districts and from CARB to really reduce these emission sources on through regulations. I think one of the most promising and in positive developments has been the direction of the indirect source rule for warehouses at the South Coast Air Quality Management District. A lot of staff work, a lot of effort from the advocates have gone into it. And ultimately, while there's still a number of details that need to be fleshed out, there's a number of issues and concerns that certainly are still up in the air. I think making sure that we have a strong indirect source rule. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's really targeting magnets of pollution. So even though these facilities do not generate much pollution on their own, they attract sources, they attract things that generate that pollution. So being able to have a stronger indirect source rule for warehouses is going to be important, especially for those communities near goods movement corridors, particularly out in the Inland Empire, where we're seeing massive expansion of warehouses in that region. But it also sets up a precedent for stronger regulations for other magnets of pollution, other indirect sources. Rail yards are also going to be in that. Facility-based mobile source measures is the kind of general term that the district uses. The ports are also going to be part of that. Airports are going to be part of it. So having a strong rule for warehouses is going to be very important when we come to those other sources as well. Implementation of SB 210, which was a major policy victory for Coalition for Clean Air and many other advocates who've been part of it, that effort for years. A lot of people didn't realize it, but trucks, heavy duty trucks, were exempted from the smog check program. And for years, they just had a visual opacity inspection, whether or not they were billowing out black smoke. SB 210 will change that, and CARB is in the process of developing a pilot project, which will hopefully, in the very near future, develop a maintenance and inspection program, smog check program for trucks. That's going to be a significant win for air quality. Really ensuring that our drayage fleets, the fleets that take goods from the ports to warehouses, is going to be also an important rule, because those are oftentimes the dirtiest trucks. And I know that CARB has outlined some priorities and some policies to really adhere to when they're developing regulations, crafting regulations, and making sure that we're adhering to those policies, that those priorities, those commitments and values is going to be very important. Consistency with AB 617 as well. Each of these communities have developed, many of these communities, I should say, have developed a community emissions reduction plan, which guides and outlines different strategies on how to reduce emissions from these sources at the local level. We can do state regulation, we can do regional regulation, but where it meets the road, where the rubber meets the road, is at the neighborhood level. Truck idling was mentioned. I know that's a concern in my community. Truck routes, rerouting truck routes away from sensitive receptors would be a significant win for the community, and working with local governments to make sure that that's happened, that these local governments are adhering to AB 617. I think lastly is this industry also needs to be a strong partner. I appreciate in hearing that the ports are proceeding down or will be revisiting the clean truck rate. It was very disappointing, to be perfectly honest, to see the clean truck rate delayed. And I understand the economic situation at the time was difficult, but we've since had many record months of business at the ports. So it's long past time to revisit the truck rate. And I think also at the South Coast level, at least, coming back to the table with the MOU, or preferably ISR, in my opinion, will also be a really good demonstration of industry's commitment to reducing emissions in this area.
Thanks, Chris. Matt, did you have add-ons to any of that?
Oh, of course. Thanks, Chris, for teeing a lot of that up. But let me first of all say, we're looking at, you had asked about other regulatory strategies. And I think Michael had touched on that in his intro remarks, is that even with the suite of state regulations, and even if the things that we do locally, we don't believe we can get into attainment by the time the feds have asked us to or demanded us to in 2023 and 2031. But Chris did touch on a couple of things. One is you can't get out of a panel without talking about indirect source rules, right? So it is something that is on our plate. There are a lot of moving pieces and hurdles, some of which are non-technical, that we're trying to address. So I think while we work on indirect source rules, we're also working on things that you can achieve immediately. And Chris did mention AB 617. So glad to hear, first of all, that Tyson has got the infrastructure covered. So great to hear that. I am much relieved. Thank you, Tyson, for taking care of infrastructure for us. And then I also heard Heather mention the truck rate. Chris also talked about that. So I didn't quite hear when that's going to occur. So I'm anxious to hear about that. But you need some of this infrastructure and incentive programs in place to do the fleet turnover that's required. And having 617 gives us the ability to use additional incentive funds to do that. I do want to point out, though, and I think Chris is aware of this, is the incentive programs, the way they're currently structured, do not lend themselves to helping the communities directly with especially truck replacements. So we've got to figure out a better way to structure incentives to really enable these independent owner operators, these smaller fleets, to take advantage of this cleaner technology. There's no way you're going to get these small guys that were going to buy an older used diesel truck at $25,000 or $30,000 to get into a zero emission truck, which costs, 3 times the amount of a new diesel truck. So how do we crack that nut? That's going to be important, especially if we want to get, to Heather's point and to, the governor's executive, 100% zero emission by 2035. That's a tall order. How do we do that? And I think we've got to figure out a way to restructure incentives, and if we can bring the private market along, as Tyson was suggesting, that's great. But in the interim, while we're working on this, this horribly hard stuff, let's put incentives to work now and get 90% cleaner trucks on the road as soon as possible. There's a 2023 deadline for getting 2010 standard trucks on the road now. So get all those diesels off the road, replace them with the cleanest possible technology, and clean up the air, as soon as possible. So I guess that's a long way of saying, we're working on these regulatory strategies, but we don't think we can do that in time to get cleaner air for everyone that really deserves it. So let's work on incentives. I know it's not a long-term fix, but in the near term, it's going to help us with air quality.
Thanks all. And so we've been talking a lot about what's happening specifically in the state and in the various regions and very local. Michael and Tyson, I was hoping that you guys could also talk a little bit more about the federal level and other states. We got some questions about, do we believe that other states might pick up on some of these mandates, and how will that help our fleets? So can you guys kind of address that a little bit from more of other states and the federal level?
Do you want to start, Michael? Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Tyson. So California does lead the nation in policies that promote reductions of carbon emissions from transportation. And we've always served as an example of how state action can drive larger climate ambition. As most of you probably already know, in June of 2020, California adopted a first of its kind rule known as the Advanced Clean Truck Regulation, which requires manufacturers of medium and heavy duty trucks to sell zero emission vehicles in California. Soon after the adoption of that regulation in July of 2020, California and a coalition of 15 states and Washington, D.C. signed a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, committing to accelerate the adoption of zero emission technology with a target of 100% zero emission new medium and heavy duty truck sales by 2050. So considering the environmental and economic benefits that ZEVs bring with them, and we've touched on that in this panel, I'm really positive that other states will soon follow California's footsteps in promoting zero emission technologies across their transportation system. And I think that with the new federal administration and changes in some of the agencies in DC, that we will probably see a lot more support for those types of policies at the state level. So apart from the public health benefits and avoided healthcare costs of zero emission trucks, by 2030, we expect that the total cost of ownership for many of these vehicles is actually going to reach parity with conventionally fueled vehicles. So I think there's going to be a combination of policy drivers at the federal and state level encouraging adoption of these vehicles. And I think there's going to be economic incentives going forward. It'll just make a lot more sense for fleet owners to migrate to these technologies when they take into account ownership costs.
That's great. And then thanks, Michael. And I think that that's all well said. And I think that, it's a new era now with the federal government, which is really exciting and starting to see, especially as the stimulus comes out, what that will start to look like and, what they can do on the, investment tax credit side, all those types of tools that we haven't really had at our disposal. And then just from the state perspective, I think, one of the potential benefits of the past 4 years is really strengthen relationships on states within climate. And so like one of the great groups is the U.S. Climate Alliance, and we're doing a lot of information sharing, and there's, it's bipartisan. So, all states are starting to see I think we have 25 states in there now. So there's some good avenues for collaboration. And then with the governor's executive order, you're starting to see other states start to step up as well. And so the one thing I want to make sure, it's important to export these lessons, but I think really it's up to us in California, I think, to make sure to prove that this can work, right? We know it can work, but we have a lot of hurdles before we get there, right? And so I think that's, we're laser focused on making sure the implementation works here and that we share any lessons learned. So hopefully other states and other places don't have to learn the same lessons twice. And I think a lot of that will leverage and hinge on industry, right? And the industry taking the lessons learned in California and then taking those to other states as well. And so that's, at least how we're thinking about it.
Thanks, Tyson. And before we get to information for everybody, I also wanted to just touch base with Heather a little bit, and she doesn't know this, she hasn't seen any of this. But if you guys could talk a little bit, Heather, about some of the work that you guys are also doing to really advance the technology with other ports, not just, in the state, not even just in the country, but worldwide. So there is a lot of work underway with you guys as far as trying to build that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I mentioned that a little bit in my previous response. A major part of what we've been focused on at the staff level at the Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles is moving forward with the demonstration projects. I mentioned the on-road truck projects that we have mostly in partnership with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, but we do have a lot of projects underway for zero emissions for terminal equipment. And we're testing and developing for the first time a lot of equipment for yard tractors, rubber tire gantry cranes, top picks. We're looking at developing these technologies and putting them into use using traditional operations, drivers in the vehicles, but replacing them with zero emission operations and looking at how we can move forward with that. There's a lot of challenges. Infrastructure, again, is a major challenge with being able to move forward with something like that. The demonstrations we've been focused on so far, given where the manufacturers have been developing and focusing their efforts, have been on battery electric technologies. But I do think that there is a real potential for hydrogen technologies that really fit more into the traditional operations that they do in the ports with fueling. And it potentially could reduce some of the infrastructure hurdles to get there. We haven't had the opportunity to test those technologies yet, but I do think that that's something that we need to really focus on in the near term so that we can understand what a role that will have. But we really need to understand how these technologies work and make sure that we're giving the folks in the industry the opportunity to really kick the tires and have a chance to put them into use and get through some of the hurdles of is this something that's really workable? Can this get put into my operations so I can still do the work that I need to do? These technologies, first and foremost, need to meet their operational needs if we're going to be successful going forward with making the conversion. So that's where a lot of our emphasis has been building on the work that we've been doing for more than a decade in our technology advancement program, but then just expanding that with the opportunities that we've had in recent years through these grant programs to really build bigger projects and really be able to test much more and at a larger scale. And so that's been incredibly important. And the information that we're going to be getting through those demonstrations as all of these vehicles go into service, we're going to be getting some really important information in the next couple of years out of those demonstrations that I think will be beneficial across the board, not just for the terminal equipment projects, but also the parallels that we'll have to help us understand on the on-road truck side as well.
Thanks, Heather. And the next question, and we've got about 8 minutes left, and I think we all have something to say on this one, is, where can we get more information on the federal, state, and local regs and policies? So, there's a lot of interest on what we're all doing. And I think we all have websites and things to share. And I can start a little bit on our CARB website, the arb.ca.gov. Probably the easiest thing to do is just go in and search for drayage, and up will pop various websites that we have, including our regulatory efforts. But I'll kick it over to Michael if you want to talk about kind of some of the tracking tools that we're working on setting up and how folks might be able to track our efforts, and then maybe we can go from there for the districts and so on.
Thanks, Heather. So we definitely have a need to have a really good outreach and information system for affected folks and fleets. And as Heather mentioned, I do encourage you to go to our website and look for drayage. Another possibility or a good option is to look for our truck stop website. You can Google that, and that's our official source of diesel truck information for ARB. It will also include information on ZEVs and our other programs. And the truck stop site provides information on regulations, and it also provides fleets with information on compliance assistance, financial assistance, as well as upcoming deadlines and requirements for fleets. I'd also encourage you to sign up for listservs. Go and look on our website, and that will really be helpful in terms of then pushing information to all of you with relevant sort of workshops and outreach efforts that we have going on at CARB.
Henry or Matt, anything you guys want to share about information available from you guys?
Want to go, Matt?
Sure. Thanks, Henry. Well, and Henry loves the fact that we've got our website is www.aqmd.gov. So sorry about that. But if you go to our website and if you type in Prop 1B, you'll go to an incentive page where we have about a $50 million incentive program on the street now to replace pre-2010 diesel trucks. And so really encourage folks to take advantage of that. That's going to be a great program to accelerate the replacement of these older, diesel technology trucks. But it's only a drop in the bucket. We can fund, 500, less than 1,000 cleaner trucks, and we really need to get, 2 to 4 times that. So, but if you go to our website, there's just a ton of information there. Let me just say that after yesterday's inauguration, I'm really hopeful that all of us can work together to get to cleaner air. One of the common themes is unity. I think if we work together, there's nothing that we can't achieve. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Matt. Henry, anything?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So we also have a range of incentive programs here in the Bay Area. The Carl Moyer program, our Transportation Fund for Clean Air, and others. It's usually roughly $100 million per year. So there's a lot there. A lot of our funding has gone to drayage trucks and other heavy duty vehicles. So again, as everybody else has said, go to our website, type in incentives or drayage trucks or Moyer, and there's a whole lot of information there on Air District, Bay Area Air District incentive programs.
Tyson or Heather, anything you guys want to add?
I'd like to jump in if you don't mind. So we at the port, we obviously have our website and we have our information posted there as well, but we have a couple of other resources too. We have our port drayage truck registry that we oftentimes, when announcements come out, will use that to distribute information. It goes directly mostly to trucking companies, but it does help distribute the word to a lot of the drayage companies that are operating in the ports. We also coordinate with the Harbor Trucking Association, which is a really good forum to help us get information out directly to drivers. In the Port of Long Beach, we also have a Clean Truck Center, which is, we've had it in operation for more than a decade, and it's really a good resource for the drayage operators to come in and learn more information about what they need to know right now. Out of that facility, we have a consultant that's helping to provide assistance to the drivers in applying for the grants that Matt mentioned. And so we're trying to offer some facilitation to help those drivers get access to the funding that's available. And that's the type of thing that we want to continue to try to do to support our drivers and helping them to get access to those funds. But one thing that I will mention, and this has been something that's come up in the past, is there are a lot of different activities. We at the port have our activities, AQMD has theirs, CARB has theirs. If there is a way for us to synthesize the information about what the expectations are, if that can, the different timelines, the different opportunities for funding, if there's a way to synthesize that into one fact sheet or one web page where you can get all that information, that's something that we've heard over the years is it's confusing for folks to juggle all of these different timelines and expectations and requirements. And if there's a way that we can coordinate on the messaging for that, I think that that will be beneficial, not just to us in trying to implement what we're trying to do from our priorities, but more importantly to the industry that needs to be responsive.
Anything quick, Tyson? We got about a minute and a half.
Yeah, I think Heather summed it up really well. I think that's what we're trying to do is bring everything kind of, so it makes sense and a normal person can understand it. And this says, just a quick plug, for the ZEV market development strategy, we're developing a website too. And our goal is to have very simple, easy to understand metrics that we can all align around and agree with, and then clear avenues to lessons learned. And it's not to take over any website, but to point to all the different resources. The challenge is it gets very complicated very quickly. So we're trying to streamline as much as possible. We'll need everybody's help and input.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add to that I think that I've heard from a lot of the community members is, we need to make sure that these resources are available in multiple languages. Yeah. We need to make sure that these aren't only available just on a website, that we are providing hard copies. We need to make sure that information is available in short video segments, things like that. So those are all things that we're all trying to figure out how to be more accessible. But I thank you all very much for your time, and thank you for sharing. Appreciate the partnership that we are working together to try and push us all forward to zero, and we will reach our goal of 100% zero emission dredge trucks by 2035. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.